Hello again, I'm doing this. I made a recently read and currently reading, and these can be an easy format to do because I'm just sitting here and telling you about the things that I currently read. And I like doing them and I like tracking what I'm reading, so I'm gonna keep doing this while I have the time to do it. In this one, I'll tell you the last books that I read during 2020 and the first books that I read during 2021. So I'm gonna title this one of 2021, and then hopefully by the end of this, I will have pretty much all of the books documented that I read during 2021. Don't quote me. Every time that I say something like this in the beginning of the year, I never make a video ever again. So I'm really hoping that I stick with this, hopefully. But I've read some things, so let's just go through all of the things that I have recently read. So the book that I read the longest ago now, which is the last book that I told you that I was currently reading in my last video, is The Trouble with Hating You. This is a book that I listened to on audiobook on my commute to work. It is about a girl who is very independent. She is from an Indian family, and her family is trying to find her a guy to marry, but she doesn't know if she wants to get married. She does very well for herself. She buys herself very fancy shoes and very fancy clothes and lives the life that she wants to live. This guy, Jay, who they bring to dinner without her asking, ends up being somebody that she has to work with as well. And they had a very rude first encounter, and since then they both just do not like each other. But then inevitably it turns into a romance. I liked it. It was okay. It was a very cute romance. It also dealt with some hard topics, which were very interestingly dealt with. I think that the writer put her in a very uncomfortable situation, and it was nice being the reader and having to listen to that situation because it really brought things out in the open in a way that people don't normally deal with that. It was almost like a therapy sort of setting that you would normally hear that in, but they weren't in a therapy sort of setting. It was just a group setting that they needed to let all of this out into the open, and it was just it was crazy. And the ending was just like, I can't believe they're doing this right now. I can't believe that they're being put in this situation. So that was really interesting because it wasn't a hard-hitting contemporary in my eyes or to my ears. Like, it didn't feel like that throughout the entire story. And then this just like hit home at the end when she really had to go through it out in the open with her whole family. So that part was really interesting, and I would still recommend reading it or listening to it. I thought it was a different sort of romance. Why not? Just read it. I gave it 3 stars, I think. It wasn't like something that I felt was particularly special, but I still enjoyed it. The next thing that I listened to was The City Baker's Guide to Country Living. This one was not particularly memorable, but basically it was about this girl who was a pastry chef in Boston, and she messed up and they told her to take a break, and she went to Vermont, which is where her best friend lives. And her best friend was like, hey, why don't you stick around for a while? There's this job over here that you could get. And it was for this, like an inn. This was very Gilmore Girls, where like there was an inn and they needed a pastry chef. And she went over there to get the job, and the lady there was like very cranky, and she asked her to bake a pie as part of her application, and she basically just wanted to like show this old lady up because this old lady was like cranky and rude, and she wanted to show her like, hey, I can do this, like I'm a very renowned pastry chef, like I got this. And then turns out that this old cranky lady has been winning blue ribbons for her pies for a very long time, and within the past few years she hasn't been able to get that blue ribbon. This girl from Boston sticks around in Vermont to help her try and win, and she builds herself a nice little life there. And it was a fine story, and I really like reading about cooking, so that's why like I was really into this. Like, who doesn't want to? I was also like watching the Great British Baking Show on Netflix during this time, so I really wanted that like nice comfort sort of vibe, and it was fun. Like, I liked those part of the story a lot, but then there was also like this romance thrown to the side, which was like the romantic partner was really weird, and it was just like awkward, and I didn't love that part of the story at all. Her life was like sort of all over the place, and I didn't care about her life. I just cared about the cooking. And since I didn't really care about the characters, I gave it 2 stars because it was just like, bleh. but I liked the setting a lot. It was, like I said, very Gilmore Girls. The next book I read via ebook, and it was One by One by Ruth Ware. This is another one that I said that I was currently reading in my last video, and I said that I don't anticipate giving it more than 3 stars, and I was correct. It was like a very average 3-star thriller for me. It was like okay. It wasn't anything magical, unfortunately, but it was about this group of people that work for Snoop, which is an app where you can snoop on what people are listening to. And that whole company just goes up to a ski resort, and only like 4 of them or 5 of them end up living. The other ones end up dying and things happen. Basically, that's what the whole story is set around, is like that scenario. I liked the vibe. I liked it in general. I didn't think it was a bad story at all. It just wasn't anything crazy where I was like jumping off my seat. I would suggest, like, if you think that that is an appealing sounding story, read it, because I feel like it's gotten a lot of bad reviews, and I don't think that should sway people from reading it, because it still is like, it's a fun story. The next one was my first book of 2021, and it was The Best, This Close to Okay by Lisa Cross Smith. It was so good. I got my book of the month. I am back to book of the month. I wasn't doing book of the month for a while because I was just like getting all these stacks of books that I just wasn't going through. But I saw this book and it was really appealing, and it was gonna be like a new release in late January, and I was like, but I wanna read it now. So I picked up this book of the month. I'll put my referral link to book of the month down below, and I will also put, I have an Instagram story that I'm making for all of my 2021 reads. So if you just want like a quick blurb of all my 2021 reads, I will be refreshing it throughout the year every time that I finish a book. So if you don't want an entire summary of all of these stories like I'm doing right here, if you just want to like click through each of them, you can do that there. Anyway, This Close to Okay was about this lady that sees this guy on a bridge about to jump, and she stops and tells him not to do it, and he gets in the car with her and they go to a coffee shop, and the story starts from there. She is a therapist, but she doesn't tell him right away because she doesn't want him looking at her in a different light, and he also has a past that he doesn't necessarily want her knowing about. I related to both of these characters in very different ways, but both characters were really relatable, and I loved both of them, and that is why I love this story. Every story should be like this, where I love the love interest and also the main character, and it was told in both of their perspectives too, and both of them sort of changed throughout the story. Oh, it was so good. And it was based around just like having everything around you feel comfortable and normal, and just it was so good. And the other good thing about it, I don't want to say that because that's a spoiler, but basically there wasn't this happily ever after at the end, and that's what I loved the most about this book. It took me for a ride, and I really appreciated it, and I like savored every bit of it. And there's a lot of really good writing in there, and it was just like a comfort story, which I missed. I haven't had a comfort story like that in a very long time. And if you like contemporary, just a good contemporary book, please read it, because I really enjoyed it. It was a great time for me. Please read that book. 5 stars from me. Okay, the next book I listened to, it was Queenie. Queenie is about this girl. She is 25, she turns 26 in this story, and it's just about her life. She had this boyfriend named Tom. Tom decided that they need to take a break, and so in the beginning of this story, she's like looking for different flats. They're all too expensive. She's going back and forth from like her friends' houses to her grandparents' house, and you meet like all these people that she's connected to. She makes like all these little comfort pods for herself, and she's trying to fill holes that are missing with Tom. And with Tom, she really genuinely just thinks, okay, we're on a break, he just needs some time, and then we're gonna get back together. So a lot of the story is reflecting on her past relationship, learning more about her familial relationships. Her family is Jamaican, and there's a very specific culture around her family. Her friends are very specific within their culture as well, because some of them aren't Jamaican, but some of them understand that perspective as well. And then you have all the different relationships that she's getting in that are not with Tom, and it's wild and sad. And you just want to shake her sometimes and be like, you have so much more self-worth than this. And I know that because like you're hearing about it, like she knows that too. But all that's going on along with the stuff that happened in her past, is giving her panic attacks. So she has to deal with that as well. It's basically just the life of Queenie. You're getting the life of Queenie in a bunch of different aspects, and it was a really cool story to listen to. But I also didn't feel like anything that happened to her really affected me, but she was a very complex character in herself. So as a character study, I thought it was a very well-written book. But that's mainly what I thought it was like a character study. I gave it 3 stars, and I don't really have a good reason for that, other than like I really just thought that it was a character study and I was looking for more of like a broader story. But you learned deeply about Queenie, and like at the end you see her found family and like how she made a life for herself, and it was wonderful in that respect. If any of this sounds interesting to you, just read it, because I did really enjoy it, or listen to the audiobook, because the audiobook was really nice. The last book that I've completely finished, I finished this morning. It's The Only Child. The Only Child I thought was supposed to be like a very scary horror book. It was not. It was like an entertaining thriller, and it was kind of predictable. It was like a Ruth Ware book where like I don't mind that it was predictable. I liked the story, but it wasn't anything that I was just like, oh, this is the best book ever. But I enjoyed it. It was entertaining, and I could honestly see it being a series in the future. I feel like she set up the ending where like I could follow some of these characters into their adulthood, and it would be really interesting. You follow a few different people in this story, but basically it's about a serial killer and his life, and you like get to hear about his childhood and everything. And then it's also about this child that you meet in the very beginning of the story. She was caught in a fire, and basically she tells the fire detectives, call my dad please. She has his card, and then they are connected by this lady. This lady happens to be the new wife of the child's dad, and this lady is also picked specifically by the serial killer to interview him. So this lady is in the very middle, and these 2 people are over here. And that's who you're following throughout the entire thing. And it was a pretty fast-paced story. Again, I enjoyed it. I liked hearing about like these different perspectives, and her in the middle, kind of oblivious, but she tries her best, and I liked it. It was okay. It was another 3-star book for me. Currently, I'm in the middle of 3 different books. I'm really trying to have like an audiobook going on, an ebook, and a physical copy. I'm like very early on in most of these books right now, and I don't know if I particularly like any of them either, but I don't know if that's a bad thing. Like I only have 1 5-star so far and a lot of 3-star books, and that's kind of the trend that's been happening, is like a bunch of 3 stars, 1 5-star, a bunch of 3 stars. I don't hate that, because I'm using books right now as my form of entertainment during my commute and also at home. And am I really gonna love every single thing that I ingest? Not necessarily. I think that's fine, as long as I'm enjoying it. I literally have only read the prelogue of this one, so I don't know if I'm gonna continue with it yet, but it's a very pretty book. It's Eat a Peach. It's David Chang's memoir. David Chang is a world-renowned chef. He's been on a lot of cooking shows. I really like him a lot, and I'm excited to learn more about his story. Like I said before, I really like hearing about cooking. I really like watching all the cooking shows on TV, Hell's Kitchen, Top Chef. So that's my physical book. The ebook that I'm currently reading is This Anything by Jerry Seinfeld, and this is his memoir, but not actually. I thought that it was more of a memoir, but really it's just like a lot of his bits. They're all organized between decades. So I went through the 70s, now I'm in the 80s, then it'll be like all the different other decades, and in between the decades it'll give like a few pages about his life during that time. I wish that those few pages were elongated, but what can you do? It's still like a nice thing to read through when I don't have anything else to do. And the last thing is the audiobook that I'm currently listening to, and that is Daisy Jones and the Six. I didn't love it at first. I'm like slowly getting into it. The audiobook is interesting because the book is told in a lot of people's different perspectives. I thought that it was going to be mainly Daisy Jones's perspective, but it is Daisy Jones and the 6 other people's perspectives. So at first listening to it, it was just like a lot. I really like The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid, so that was a 5-star read for me last year, and I was like hesitant about this one because even just like the summary of it was just not something that I thought I was going to be super into. And then other people really enjoyed it, and I was like, maybe I'll really enjoy it, so I picked it up. But I just don't see how hearing from 7 people's different perspectives is going to make me love anybody in specific. So I don't know. Hopefully I end up really liking one of those books, if not all of those books, and hopefully I just continue to read more in 2021. I'm really liking the fact that I'm like getting through so much content. So I hope that you guys have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week. Tell me if you've read any of these books. Tell me what you're currently reading. I would love more recommendations. And that's it. I hope that I see you soon. Goodbye.